Hey everybody, and welcome to the Board Gamer Girl channel. If you're returning, thank you for returning. And if you're new here, welcome to my channel. My name is Natalie and I am a primarily solo gamer. I'll be covering and talking about games from a solo perspective. What this video is about is for our top 10 games of 2025. And I will say, while I was doing this list, some entries surprised me that they entered my top 10 list as high as they did, but I really do feel good about them. I'll also be going over some of my honorable mentions, but unlike other channels, I'm going to put them at the end just so that it doesn't take away from the experience of knowing it's not on my top 10 list. But without further ado, I will get to my top 10 games of 2025. All right, so my number 10 game of 2025 is one that won the Spiel des Jahres last year, and that game is Endeavor Deep Sea. And this is a great game from two publishers that came together and brought us a new rethemed, repackaged, and streamlined edition of a previous game that was called Endeavor Age of Sail, I believe. And I mean, the theme was colonialism, so almost anything is better than that. But I really like the theme of this game. So in the game, you're a deep sea explorer or adventurer, and you're trying to explore deeper and deeper into the ocean and gaining more research and ways to help out marine life and basically conserve the ocean and marine life. It's also very vibrant, the art and the colors that are in the game. But one of the things that I like the most about the game is every player board is almost like a tech track, but it works at action optimization. So in some games in the beginning of the game, you'll take an action and it kind of is just like one little quick thing and you move on to the next thing. But when you get closer to the end game, you'll be going through different chainings of those actions, and the action will move into one thing, and make it like a longer string of satisfying chaining combos that you'll be doing, and you'll be able to optimize which types of actions or what you'll be doing on your player board. Anyways, that was one of the specific areas I really liked. I also appreciate that in the box, it comes with so much variety just in the base game itself. So I think there's like 10 different scenarios and missions, and I think all of them can be played co-op, competitive, and solo. And solo, you'll use a small little deck of cards that you'll use each round. It's 6 rounds in total for the whole game, so it's also like a very tight game that you'll be taking maybe 15, I don't know. But anyways, it's a limited amount of time in order to be efficient and productive with the actions that you're taking. That was a really great game from mostly the beginning of the year. I think I played that one, but it is my number 10 game of 2025. So for my number 9 game of 2025, this was definitely a surprise for me. It does not have a solo mode, and it is the only game on my list that does not have a solo mode. I usually say I really do not care for 2-player only games because it is the hardest player count for me to get a game to the table. But this game is Zenith, and it is fantastic. It is a 2 or 4 player, but it's definitely more of a 2-player game. Tug of war to try and win over more planets than your opponent. And the game ends when one person at the table either gets 3 of the same colored planets, 4 different colored planets, or 5 planets in total, and they win the game. Basically, the loop of playing the game is by playing cards that'll push those planets closer to your side of the board. And I think what made it onto this list and what makes it unique from different tug of war games that I've played that are 2-player only is the 3 different areas in which you can play your cards down to. So there's the basic area, which most games have, where you'll be playing a card down into your area in order to pull something to come over to your side. So in this case, the planets. So you'll pay for the card, you'll put it down, and some of those cards will have extra actions or extra bonuses, but that's the basic premise of what you're trying to do with the card there. Or if you don't have any type of currency or money to pay for cards, you can use them to pay for a diplomacy action in which you'll get a little starter token or something that'll let your hand be either 5 or 6 cards instead of the normal 4, and you'll get yourself a little bonus, typically money or Zenith, which is like another currency in the game. But the biggest part that sets this game apart from other tug-of-war style 2-player games is the addition of a tech track and the tech track optimization. How you use this track is you can play one of 3 different races of cards into a specific tech track, and once you unlock that first tech, it'll either push a planet of your choice towards your side or give you extra cards or whatever. But the next time you go to that same track and try to optimize that action, you unlock a new tech, and you'll get to go through all of the other techs that you've already unlocked. So the more you put into a certain tech track action, or just the tech track in general, the more it'll influence. And I really liked that the board for the tech track is also a little bit modular, so you won't necessarily have to play with the same tracks or the same iteration of the 3 different tracks. Another little tidbit that I personally liked is the reference to different sci-fi movies or characters in pop culture that you can find on the cards when you're looking through. So for instance, I think there's like a gorilla card called Caesar, which obviously comes from Planet of the Apes. So that was an added little bonus. The game is approachable and it is on BGA, and that is where I played it most of the time before wanting to get my own copy. And that is my number 9 game, Zenith. So my number 8 game of 2025 is one that's definitely after my little nerdy heart, and the theme of the game is definitely seen throughout. It is similar to The Crew, which was a big hit for my family a year or so ago, where we distance played it through the whole first game online, and was our first ever full campaign game that we played. This is probably also the longest titled game in my top 10, but it is the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring trick-taking game. Holy cow. I wish there was, I think I just call it the Fellowship or something from now on. They are coming out with a second series of this game, but that's for another video. With the Fellowship of the Ring, the trick-taking game, it is basically a trick-taking game with a narrative focus that takes you through, I think it's 18 chapters, that takes you through the story of the first book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And like I said, it is very similar in a sense to The Crew, where you and other people at the table will be working at particular missions, and in this case chapters, where you have to work on specific goals for each chapter in order to pass and go forward into the story. But for Lord of the Rings, the trick-taking game, the thematic touches to each chapter that you'll be going through is really interesting. I will say the beginning is very light and kind of introduces you to trick-taking and the flow of the game. But as you move through, you'll be introduced to different characters, different missions that you go through, and it's definitely been one of my family's favorites. We've almost completed all of the chapters. We have about 5 left, and I have to say that I have to also give a shout out for the art in this game. I think it was a bit divisive when it first came out, just because the art seemed a lot different a lot different than other interpretations that are more traditional of the fantasy series. And this one had more stained glass type of interpretation, not just the characters, but the cards in total. But another strong thing that put this in my top 8, and probably my most played game of all of 2025, is that it plays well from 1 to 4 players. I will say it's probably a little bit more difficult at 1 or even 2 because you're using variant rules in order to play. It's still accessible, and it was still fun playing at different player counts. But you don't need to be a Lord of the Rings fan in order to enjoy it. But I will say that it got my mom to finally want to watch the Lord of the Rings movies in order to understand the characters and the things that we saw in the game, so that was neat. But yeah, that was my number 8 game of 2025. And on to my number 7 game of 2025. And this one, the title is kind of funny. It's not funny, but it works in 2 different ways. So thematically, it's not necessarily as heavy thematically as you'd think, but it does kind of work with the main mechanism of the game. And this one is called Eternal Decks. And Eternal Decks is one that hit me out of nowhere. I think I first played it in December, so there's some recency bias maybe. I also do not have a copy myself, so I haven't played it solo, but it does play solo. In the game, I think it's got a theme that made me think of Expedition 33, which I don't really play video games, but I know that was a popular one. But I think the premises are similar, where I think human life expectancy is lowering. And in order for humans or whatever kind of people in this imaginary world, they end up having to go into this underworld or something where they awaken Eternals in order to breathe new life into humans and make their lives longer. The theme, it's important in a way, but it's very abstract in a sense of how it works. But the main mechanism is that every player has their own deck to start with. It's co-op, there's communication limits, but if you can't play a card from your deck or a hand of cards, then you've lost the game. And that goes for if anyone at the table ends up with that. So what you're trying to do is continue to build up people's decks while you're playing the game to get to a certain point where you win that level. And part of the game is that there's various levels to go through. So there's some variety in the game and feels kind of video gamey in that sense as well. But this was a really neat way to go about deck building because every player has to play a card on their turn. They play it into a row where they've got a set of rules they have to follow. Most of the basic rules is that you can't play the same color after another color, and you can't play the same number after a certain number. And some of the row rules will be you have to go in ascending order. As soon as you complete that row, the person who finishes by placing their card on that row will be able to awaken an Eternal. And by doing so, they get to claim one of the decks in that row, which gives them more cards because they're depleted. You play the cards out and they just go into a discard pile. You do not get those cards back. So it's important to keep gaining decks, but as soon as you awaken that Eternal, it will also put a curse on the rest of the table. So basically another type of rule when you're playing cards. So for instance, you wake up an Eternal and that Eternal gives you a deck of cards with different colors, and the Eternal will also not let anyone at the table play 5s for some reason. Anyways, it was a really neat game. The art is definitely so good and it's unique. I really like seeing more unique art out there these days. I think something that was similar to this art style was Fame and Fable, which I got to take a peek at last year. And usually I'm not someone who likes a black board and like neon, different types of colors necessarily, because in board games it sounds cool, but it doesn't necessarily translate to having a clean, clear board that gives you a lot of clarity in being able to play the game. As well, when it comes to cards, after a while, if there's black cards, you basically have to sleeve it because it'll get run down around the edges pretty quickly, and sometimes people can tell what cards are what. That is my number 7 game of 2025, Eternal Deck. Okay, and with that, we are on my number 6 game of 2025. And this is a game where, honestly, when I first saw it, I was like, why do people like this? This is judging a book by its cover, and it's so good. And the game is Moon Colony Bloodbath. Now, the cover Honestly, so it comes from Rio Grande Games, and sometimes the art feels a little dated for some of their games, and it does with this cover, but ironically it works so well because the theme screams 80s sci-fi cult classic movie where it's something like comedic but dark, like a Mars Attacks kind of movie. So in Moon Colony Bloodbath, players are colonizers of the moon, and they are trying to build out their own colony while also utilizing technological advancements like robots to help make their community. But as they're building up and making more work on these colonies, the robots end up having incidents or different kinds of accidents occur and humans start dying. The whole premise of the game is basically to survive. So either somebody at the table has to sacrifice all of their humans, or everyone survives by the time that they reach event 13 or 14, I believe. And the person who has the highest population at the end of the game wins the game. Now, this game plays from 1 to 4 players, but what's interesting is there's a communal deck that'll build over the period of time of the game with different cards, but you'll only have 4 action cards in that deck in total throughout the game. And you will only be able to take those particular actions that you have on your player board when those cards arrive, like come out of the deck. Come out of the deck, like me. Anyways, the most fun part and something that I haven't seen before is this idea of engine building and then engine destroying, because as these different events come out of the deck and you're just trying to survive, there's a lot of twists that'll happen or robots will come out. So for instance, like a chef robot, and the card calls for you to sacrifice 7 humans, which, I mean, ridiculous, but you can picture it like a sci-fi comedy cult classic type of movie. But you'll need to sacrifice people, and you only have so many that you start the game with, but every time you play a building into your player area, it'll come with people. And as the game progresses, those buildings that you worked so hard to put out that give you different actions or action optimization will have to be sacrificed, because you need to sacrifice humans in order to continue in the game at all. It's like you're building out your engine and then you have to slowly crack back down, and it's just really interesting, and it just called for a lot of laughs while you're playing the game. I don't think you take the game too seriously, but it also plays really well, pretty much just the same solo, as again, you're mostly working with this one deck, and the deck will call for you to add more and more cards, so rounds get longer and longer, and you're trying to get through I think you'll only be adding 1 event per time through the main central deck. So that's like 13 rounds you have to be alive. And in solo, you only add 1 extra card, the lonesome card or something, which again, the game doesn't take itself too seriously. And I really like that in a game. Sometimes board gaming and board gamers are a little too serious for my liking, and I mean, part of board gaming for me, if I'm not playing solo, is a sociable aspect, and Bloodbath definitely entertains the table when you've got it on the table. My number 5 game of 2025 is one that, like, what was it, Endeavor Deep Sea, is similar in the sense that it's a retheme, it's streamlined, and it is far superior to its predecessor, and that game is Saltfjord. So if you don't already know, this game is by the same designers who did Santa Maria, but Santa Maria, just like Age of Sail, was also based on colonialism, so this already is a way better palatable theme. In this game, you're a Norwegian fisher person, and your task is to revitalize this small fishing village into the new century. So you'll be trying to build up your little community. You'll go down the fjord to do fishing and get resources. You'll be fulfilling contracts and, yeah, building up your village, trading and gaining resources. And part of the reason that I really like this game is the dice drafting and dice worker placement of the game. So those are the main mechanisms pretty much for the game. And it's a tight game over 3 rounds and only 15 turns, which gives you a lot of tension, but there's tons of things you want to do, but you can only do some of them. So my favorite part of the game is the dice drafting and dice worker placement part of the game, where at the beginning of your turn, you'll be drafting a die from this pool of dice on your turn. And in the first round, there's only 3 white and 1 orange, but every round you'll get another orange, and there's only 3 rounds and 15 turns in the entire game. But what you'll be doing with these dice is you'll be playing them either horizontally or vertically on your board, and you'll be taking all the different actions that have been built out on your board in that row or column to the end. The last action in any row or column that that dice lands on is not an action that you can take again during that round. So it's really interesting in trying to figure out what dice to take and what actions to take in different rows and columns. But you'll also be building this out, so you'll be collecting different resources, and those resources can be used on turns where you're going to take tiles to add to your board and create a more complex grid. So similar to Endeavor Deep Sea, one of the things that I like is when you play in the beginning of a game and you've got not a lot that's going to happen when you do your turn, like maybe 1 or 2 different things. You might sail and get a resource, and that's it. But as you build out your board, when you take your dice and you go down your grid of player board actions, you're going to be comboing and chaining into actions, into other actions, gaining resources, doing free actions. And it's really interesting that the short turns become these big turns, and it like that kind of stuff is just really fun for me. So I really liked that. I will say it plays basically the same solo as it does competitively or multiplayer. It's all competitively. There is no co-op mode. But I will say that for some, as a solo game in an optimization kind of situation, I really like it, but there's not as much interaction, I think, with other players, more so like, oh, you took this when I wanted to take that tile kind of thing, or you took this die when I was looking to take that die. But basically it's kind of heads down and looking at your own player board. But I really like the game, and I am primarily solo, so whatever. This is number 5 on my list, and I will no longer justify it. Or I will justify it. What am I talking about? Anyways, on to the next one. These last few games were definitely difficult to place. I could probably interchange some of them with their placement, except for my number 1. I'm pretty sure that my number 1 will be my number 1 of 2025, regardless of anything else. But this game is beige on beige Euro, and it is so satisfying and yet surprisingly quick to learn and quick to play. At least my perspective and my experiences with it, with the people that I've been playing the game with. And this game is called Galileo Galilei. And it being in my number 4 spot almost feels low, but like I said, we'll see what's going on with the rest of the list after this one. But in Galileo Galilei, you are an astronomer who's seeking more knowledge of the stars. So you'll be working to discover constellations, finding star systems, working at moving up academy and university tracks, and trying not to be persecuted by inquisitors, calling you a heretic for the knowledge that you have, and hopefully you'll be able to explain to them more of your knowledge in order to have them more on your side instead of negatively on your side. So in the game, the person who collects the most victory points or fame points wins the game. The game is relatively quick. I think it was taught and played at a 4-player count with 2 people who hadn't played before in almost under an hour the first time I played. And that is something you do not expect looking at this cover. It looks like a heavy Euro that's going to take at least an hour and a half to 2 hours to play. No. With Galileo Galilei, part of the thing that I find unique and one of my favorite aspects of the game is on your player board, the way that you select your actions is through this rondelle. And the rondelle has different action tokens that can be upgraded over time, which I also really like to do, and sometimes end up hyper focused on that and forget about points sometimes. But anyways, you'll be using a telescope to go and look at the sky, which will point to a certain action. A lot of your actions are gaining, maintaining, and upgrading dice of 3 different colors that can be mixed and matched in order to observe constellations or claim the knowledge or research of different star systems that you'll be playing into your own player board area. But rondelle as a mechanism in any game is something that I really liked. I know it's very prevalent. I speak well. It's very prevalent in Alexander Pfister games, who is a designer that I really enjoyed, especially when I first got into the hobby. And I really like the way that it's used in Galileo Galilei. Also, just again, it plays really well solo. It plays pretty much similarly. I think there is a solo deck that you're playing against. Sometimes they get carried away with like an Inquisitor bonus points, because the Inquisitors work where once you collect them, they end up in a negative area of your player board, and every once in a while you're triggered to have to count the negative or positive points of the Inquisitors in your like little random dungeon area of your player board. And that's kind of like the only negative point aspect of this game. But it's really interesting. Again, it plays quick. It's pretty easy to understand, and once you get going after a couple turns, you're really into it. But the optimization of the rondelle and a game with a rondelle is something that I really find appealing. This game also has an expansion that either came out last year or the beginning of this year officially. I can't remember, but I do appreciate that there are more female astronomers from this time period, as it like references actual historical individuals. And that is my number 4 game, Galileo Galilei. All right, I know this video is getting really long, but it is a top 10 list of an entire year, so that's definitely gonna be longer than what most of my videos would be like. In any case, we are at the top 3 spot of my 2025 best games of 2025. This game is a space themed game again, which I don't really care for space, but this one was really good. And it has a similar feel to one of my favorite games of all time called Kanban EV. But this game is brought to us by a first-time designer and first-time publisher. It's a heavy Euro worker placement game, and it is called Galactic Cruise. Galactic Cruise is just, it's so good. And in the game, basically the premise is that you're an executive working for a cruise company, and you're trying to be the best executive there is. You'll be trying to build out the spaceships, so the front and the bottom, and the front and the bottom. I don't know what the names are, okay? But you'll also be drafting for those tiles and the tiles for the different rooms that you're gonna have on these cruises. You'll also be working to gain a flight path and different types of tourists for the flight path that you're heading on with your cruise ship. And those are basically the cycle of things that you're mainly doing. There are a couple different actions that'll help you optimize. So like your reputation, you'll want to go up. If you need resources in order to launch your ship, you can get rid of these little wheels in order to tag yourself closer to other actions around the board. There's a lot of things to do, but there's a main loop of the game, and it's similar to the same logical, easy to understand way that you'll be going towards building up to launching your ship, just like in Kanban EV, where you're building up to build out a car, do the different upgrades, send it on the testing track, and complete the car for production to go out. So the main mechanic is doing that, and it's a race to try to complete as many launches or as many major overarching goals for 3 different sets of meetings where it'll head into endgame, and then you'll see who has the most points wins. This game, like, I think the biggest thing that also drew me to this game is the art and organization, iconography, just very clear graphic design decisions that make it a lot easier for me to get this to the table, because there's a lot of things where I don't even have to go back to the rule book. I can just see at a glance that certain things mean certain things. And you don't necessarily get that as clearly in some designs. I think people underestimate how good graphic design can really help the player experience and the ability to replay games over and over again, especially for heavier games. So that was something I liked. Ian O'Toole is the artist, so very similar to other Lacerda games where Ian O'Toole is also the artist on that game. Anyways, the last thing I'll say for the game is that they also borrow the Lacerda game, The Gallerist, and also House of Fado that came out recently. When you place a worker on an action spot, you take your turn, blah, blah, blah. If someone else comes along and bumps your worker off of that spot, you'll get a benefit. And I really like that happening, especially when you start the game with only 2 workers. So every time you have both of your workers out, you have to spend a whole turn calling your workers back to a meeting. And you'll get income, but it's kind of a slower turn. So being able to have your workers bumped brings them back to you with a benefit and lets you prolong that meeting of just having to send workers back to your player board instead of just continuing to build up your turns. I really like that mechanic in games, and it's just a small extra touch, but again, something I really like. But that is my number 3 game of 2025, Galactic Cruise. So we are at my number 2 game of 2025, and this one kind of just squeaked in at the end of December as I got to play it multiplayer, and it's probably got the most unique component and unique theme based off of a historical thing, and it is called the Voynich Puzzle. So the Voynich Puzzle is apparently an indecipherable manuscript found in 1912 that is composed of 5 different areas, or at least for this game. I don't know the manuscript myself, but in this game they use 5 different key knowledge areas that are in the manuscript. So there is a botany area, astrology, studies on literature or language. There's baths, which is weird, but the whole thing is weird. And then there's recipes, which in the game is kind of like a hodgepodge of putting the other 4 areas together. The 5 areas are what you're going to be concentrating on and building out. And when you're able to discover certain knowledge from these areas, you'll be adding puzzle pieces into this main area called the shared knowledge area. And each type of knowledge is color-coded. So I think baths are blue, so you'll put a blue puzzle piece in the shared area. But when you place a magnifying glass on sections of this shared knowledge puzzle, you'll be able to upgrade some cards in your own personal manuscript. So everything is very interconnected, but your main job is to try to decipher this indecipherable manuscript. So the person with the most overall knowledge is the one that wins. But in order to get the most overall knowledge, you have to make sure that you concentrate a little bit of each of the different types of knowledge on the board. And while it sounds confusing, and the premise and how it works, it sounds far more confusing than the actual playing of the game, because the main component of the game is a little like wallet card holder. And in the beginning of the game, every player will get 2 starting cards from the manuscript that they can put in their little flippy book thing. So 2 pages will be baths, 2 pages will be astronomy. When you take an action, you'll take the action of one of the 2 actions, and then on your next turn, you'll have to take a different action from another page. You can't take the same action from the same page, which is a small little iteration on actions that I like from Scythe, is where I remember it from. But the other thing is that each of these pages, as you work to upgrade that card by sharing more knowledge, then the page itself also starts to get more colorful and you can see more of the manuscript coming to life. And that, just the thematic art of it, is really neat. So again, it all sounds very complicated, but it feels like you're taking micro turns in each of these sections, and it will take time for you to get efficient at understanding how to interconnect your bath actions to getting the points in the astronomy actions and seeing that clearly. So the one thing that makes me wonder how I will like this game further on is because the setup is probably very finicky, as you've got different puzzle pieces to do. You've got to redo your manuscript cards every game, and it can be a very big table hog with the size of the board. Like, I think it's like 6 panels long, so like 3 folds and then 6 panels. And then you can also get these smaller cards that you can have out in front of you instead of just flipping back and forth. You can have them all displayed so you can see all of your cards and which cards connect to other knowledge types, etc., etc. Again, I'm making it way more complicated than it probably is. But in the game, you're also having to track all points around the scoreboard. So in a 4-player game, each player is doing their overall knowledge token, but also having to track their knowledge in baths, their knowledge in astrology, all at the same time, all on this outer rim of the board. And I think one thing that if they don't do it themselves, I'd almost want to do it myself so that it's more clear for myself and people around the table. A separate little board that is tracking each of the different types of knowledge. So it's more clear at where your opponents are and where you are, at least. It's complicated but simple at the same time, and it itches my brain in a way that I really like. It might seem like punishment, but I really enjoyed the Voynich puzzle, and I haven't played it solo yet, or at least a full game solo yet, so it's one I can't wait to explore more. And with that, it is my #1 game of 2025. It easily takes this #1 spot. It is a beige Euro worker placement game where the theme is not necessarily one I care about, but I am addicted to playing this game that takes probably an hour to 2 hours to play, and it is Darwin's Journey. So in Darwin's Journey, you are basically an explorer following the path that Darwin took when he was kind of exploring the Galapagos Island that helped lead him to the theory of evolution, blah, 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 whatever. Anyways, I mean, not blah, 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 like it's important, but anyways. I really enjoy this game, and it is addicting. It is almost like my new BGA Arc Nova game that I used to play constantly, even though it would take an hour every time I would play it. But it was my regular meaty game that I couldn't get enough of. It just hit a sweet spot in the type of games that really scratch my brain in a way that I very much like. In the game, there are different action spots that you'll be taking throughout the game. One of them is exploring on different islands. One of them is sailing through the Galapagos. One of them is correspondence, which you'll be sending out, I guess, research or details of your findings on your journey. And then there are getting these specialization wax seals. And that is one of my favorite parts of the game. Because in the game, like other games that I'm starting to realize on this list, I really like when you can build out your workers to go from smaller mini actions to improved long chaining actions by the end of the game. And in this one, it's a worker progression type of gaining these wax seals, which pertain to specializing in the other actions that make that action more powerful when you take it, or unlock certain spots that make that action more powerful as you progress through the game. Part of that I really like, but another part of the game that I really like is it's a competitive game, but there's one particular area of the board which is, you can't ignore it because it will kick your booty at endgame, but it is kind of where you put your findings, or you share your findings. I can't remember thematically how it really works, but it's like a discovery board where when you go to explore or when you go to sail and you land somewhere where you discover a new species, you get to take a token to your player board. But it's only when you send and share this knowledge that you get to put it on the main board. And on the main board, depending on if there are other discoveries in the same row or column of the discovery you're putting on that board, you'll either gain money, which is few and far between. Also, as more discoveries are put out, you'll get discovery points. And these consist of a board at just underneath it where you'll get a multiplier of endgame points based on how full this shared discovery area is. So you'll get a point for every full column and row, but those points will be multiplied by how far your track is on that board. So how much you contributed to the overall knowledge of multiple species. I don't know why I keep wanting to say that. But that and the worker progression are the two biggest takeaways for me that I think really light up my brain in ways that I like. Now, again, all these games on my list, I'm not necessarily good at. I don't usually win games, but I really enjoy this one specifically, just how it feels like no time goes by. And if you're on BGA, I am always ready to play this game. So Darwin's Journey is my #1 game of 2025. So this video has already felt very long for me to film, let alone for you to watch. So with my top 10, I promised some honorable mentions and I'll add those in now. So stay if you want, or don't, I don't know, free life, free choice. Have fun, have a great whatever. But if you are interested in the games that didn't make the list, but I feel do deserve a little tap of the hat too, these are some of them. So game that I wanted to mention was Fishing. It is a trick taker game from Rio Grande Games, and it's basic fishing. The theme does work for it, but it takes way too long, I think, to play what it is. So you're probably looking at nothing less than 45 minutes. And the game is a 3 to 5 player game. So I would hardly get it to the table if I had it myself in my collection, but I'm happy that other friends were able to bring it to game nights. And the reason that this would be a great game for people who can regularly get it to the table is that while you're going through multiple rounds of the game, the main thing is that you're trying to win traditional trick-taking hands. And the cards you acquire in that round go into your fishing net, and each of those cards, considered like fish, are points for that round. Then you'll shuffle those cards up, add them to your ship where you'll store them away, but that will be your drawing deck for the next round. So if you have to draw up to your hand size of 9 and you have 9 cards, then you're good to go. But if you have maybe 5 cards in your draw deck and you still need to draw up to 9, then you get to go to this special little deck. Well, it's a chunkier deck, but it has more powerful cards than whatever else is on the table at that point. And you'll get to take those cards and probably have a higher probability of winning future tricks. But at the same time, that means you'll be trying to lose more tricks, which gives you less points over time. So it's trying to figure out when is the best time to switch your gears from either losing tricks to get more powerful cards or winning tricks so that you can have the most points at the end of the game, which is the point of the game. So the game and trick-taking itself is really interesting. Thematically, it works. And again, part of it is it has a higher player count and it takes a long time to play. Another game that, I mean, trick takers are a hot commodity, but also communication limit games and cooperative card playing games tend to be coming out a lot. And Take Time was another one that I was able to get near the end of the year, and I really enjoyed it, but Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring trick-taking game kind of beat everything else out of the water. But Take Time is, as the Fellowship of the Ring trick-taking game is to the crew, I feel like Take Time is to the mind, or Hanabi, or something like that, where it's more about numerical numbered cards instead of any kind of big theme. It's very abstract. But in the game, you'll have 12 different chapters, and each chapter will have a set of clocks. You'll be putting those clocks on the table, and basically, without communicating to other people, is you'll be placing cards down, primarily face down, unless you have a special token to use, that you're trying to place the cards down in ascending order. So make it kind of go like a clock. So the first spot will have a 2, so the next spot either has to be equal or higher in value. And then as you're going through different chapters, new rules will come out. So in this section of the clock, you need to put down a blue and a white card specifically. In this section of the clock, you need to get 24 to 26 as your sum with the cards placed down. So it's a really interesting, neat game, but I just found that I had another game that had similar mechanisms that I just found more enjoyable than Take Time in 2025. And another game, which was another surprise, and maybe what I would think is one of the lighter games on my list, and if I had a number 11 spot, I would have put this on the list there. And it is Flamecraft Duels. And this one takes me as a surprise because it's a lighter game. It's just a light, abstract game. But I got to try this for the first time last year at Gamma. One, I like the compactness of the game. The game is one that you like fold up and carry around, and all the components, everything you need is in that small box. So it's easy to travel to like bars or just carry in your backpack and stuff. And the organizer within the game is really nice. So you get a little bag, you get little acrylic tokens, and you get really nice cards, really nice quality cards. But it's pretty much like a light chess-like board where you're trying to do pattern building and set collection from building different patterns. Those will fulfill different card contracts that you have that give you points at the end of the game, and the person with the most points wins. The most interesting part is that all of the tokens are dragons that are known from the Flamecraft series of games, and each dragon has a special ability that'll have that dragon or other dragons on the table or even in the bag get played differently, and that's what makes it really interesting to me. It's quick, it's snappy, it's accessible. I could bring this to friends or family that are casual gamers, but I still find it crunchy as like someone who likes a little bit more crunch. And it is a game that is 2-player, but also has a solo mode, and I wonder if I like this game more solo. I will probably be talking more about this game later, but Flamecraft Duels is a light, abstract strategy game that I really enjoyed. And with that, we have finally finished! I am so excited! This has taken a while, and I mean, it is a big undertaking to do a whole rundown of your entire previous year and come down to just 10 games. There were a lot of really enjoyable experiences, a lot of really great games that came out. There are some that I definitely think could have been placed on this list, but might have to be part of my anticipated games of 2026 because I didn't get them played by the cutoff. I made sure to not do this video until at least the end of the entirety of 2025, just in case I played something really amazing on December 31st. But if you've stuck in this long, I really appreciate you being here. I'm glad to be back in 2026. If you've made it through this video, thank you so much. If you like the content, give it a like. If you want to know when my next videos are coming out, press that subscribe and notification button. And you know what? This video was really long, so if you made it through, comment in the comments, banana. And if anyone even comments banana, that is a win for me. And if no one comments banana, maybe I'll just comment it myself so that I don't feel so lonely. What a premise to end this video on. Anyways, see y'all in the next one, and be kind to each other.